veterans properly before a pre-trip inspection. Because I'm saying properly because a lot of I see a lot of truck drivers, veterans, rookies, etc. They they do their pre-trip, but they miss way too many components. And sometimes I see a lot of truckers. Um, they over talk during the pre-trip inspection as well. So, without further ado, I'm gonna get right into it. Okay. First thing we're gonna do is approach the front of the vehicle. We're gonna approach the front of the vehicle, right? Oh, before I go any further, I also have to state that when you're doing your pre-trip, you must point to and state every component that you're inspecting. Okay, that's very important for you guys to pass your pre-trip and get your CDL. It doesn't matter if you're at a truck driving school or if you sign a contract to get your CDL with a trucking company, but you have to point to and state every component you're inspecting. All right, without further ado, again, let's jump right into it. So we're going to approach the front of the vehicle. We're going to check under the hood, or check under the transmission area, I'm sorry, to indicate any kind of puddles, drippings, or leaks under the transmission area. Okay, so there's no puddles, no leaks, no drippings under my transmission and engine area, so we're good. The next thing we're going to check is all of my lights. All of my lights and reflectors. Right. So we got right, left, four ways, high beams, low beams, clearance lights, reflectors. They're all clean and clear. They're not broken. They're not missing. They're not damaged. They are the correct color. Red on rear, amber elsewhere. All right, now we're going to check the overall condition of the engine. So we're going to open the hood. And every time you guys open the hood, you check on both sides. You see both sides are clear. Then you're going to yell clear before you open the hood. All right. Now we're going to move on to the right side of the engine compartment. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to check the overall condition of all my hoses. Make sure all my hoses are securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're not leaking. They're in good condition. Then we're going to check all of the wires. All of my wires. All of my wires. We're going to make sure all of my wires are securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're fastened properly. They're in good condition. Next thing we're going to check is my alternator. I'm going to make sure that my alternator is securely mounted. It is not damaged. Also, my alternator is belt driven. You must state that your alternator is belt driven. Then you have to check your alternator belt. You're going to make sure that your alternator belt, it is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not torn, worn, frayed, or cracked. And you have to make sure that your alternator belt has no more than 3/4 of an inch of play. All right. So we're done with the right side of the. We're done inspecting the right side of the engine compartment. Now we're going to inspect the left side of the engine compartment. Okay. Same thing. When you check the left, when you inspect the left side of your engine compartment, again, you must make sure that the overall condition of all of your hoses. All of your hoses are securely mounted. They are not damaged. They are not leaking. They are not torn, worn, frayed, or cracked. All of your hoses are in good condition. Next thing you're going to check is your coolant level. You're going to make sure that your coolant tank is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. You also want to make sure that your coolant tank is filled to the proper level. You want to make sure that your caps that's connected to your coolant tank are not damaged. They're tightly connected. They're not leaking. You want to make sure that the hoses that's connected to your coolant tank are also securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're not torn, worn, frayed, or cracked, and they're not leaking. Okay? The next thing you want to check is your oil level. You want to inspect your oil level. You do that by simply pulling the oil stick out, wiping it off, putting it back in, pulling it back out to make sure that your oil level is above the refill mark, which means that the oil in the truck is in safe operating range. Okay, the next thing you want to check is your water pump. Okay, you want to check your water pump. You want to make sure that your water pump, it is securely mounted. It is not loose. It is not broken. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. Your water pump is also belt driven. You want to make sure that your belt that's connected to your water pump, it is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not torn, worn, frayed, or cracked. And your belt has no more than 3/4 of an inch of play. Okay? You have to make sure that your alternator belt and the belt on your water pump has no more than 3/4 of an inch of play. It's important that you guys don't forget that. Okay, after you check your oil level, you want to check your air compressor. Your air compressor, you want to make sure that your air compressor is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. It is gear driven. You want to make sure that your air lines that's connected to your air compressor are also securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're not leaking. They're not torn, worn, frayed, or cracked. Okay? Next thing you want to do is move on to your power steering system. You want to move on to your power steering pump. Your power steering pump is behind the air compressor. Your power steering pump is securely mounted. It is gear driven. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. You want to make sure the hoses that's connected to your power steering pump are also securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're not leaking. Okay? You want to check your power steering reservoir. You want to make sure that your power steering reservoir tank is filled to the proper level. You want to make sure that your power steering reservoir tank, it is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. You want to make sure the caps that's connected to your power steering reservoir are securely mounted. They're tightly connected. They're not damaged. They're not leaking. You want to make sure that your power steering hoses are also securely mounted, tightly connected, not damaged, not leaking. Your power steering gearbox. This is your power steering gearbox. You want to make sure your power steering gearbox is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. There's no loose or missing hardware. Your steering linkage. This is your steering linkage, okay? Your steering linkage. You want to make sure all of your arms, rods, sockets, and joints are not broken. They're not loose. They're not missing. You have no missing bolts, no missing nuts, and you want to make sure that your cotter pin is in place. This is your cotter pin, okay? Now we're going to move on to the front suspension, which is I'm sorry, I'm overthinking myself. See, look at me. You want to make sure that your front suspension, okay, your front suspension is all intact. The first thing you want to check is your spring mounts. You want to make sure that your spring mounts are securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're not cracked, not broken. No missing or damaged bushings. No loose, damaged, or missing hardware. Your leaf spring. This is your leaf spring. You want to make sure that your leaf spring is not cracked, shifted, broken, or missing. Next thing you want to check is your U-bolts. You want to make sure that your U-bolts are not broken and there are no loose, damaged, or missing bolts. Okay? Then you want to check your shock absorber. This is your shock absorber. Your shock absorber, which is right here, your shock absorber is securely mounted. It is not damaged. It is not leaking. Okay? Again, you must point to and state every component you are inspecting, or you will not get credit on your road test. All right. You have to take your pre-trip inspection before your road test. After you pass your pre-trip, then you'll move on to your backing, your straight backs, maneuvers, and parallel parking. But this is first. You have to pass your pre-trip. Okay, so we just checked the shock absorber. That's good. Next thing we're going to move on to is my brake hoses. My brake hoses are securely mounted. They're not cracked, worn, or frayed. They're not leaking. Next thing we're going to check is the brake chamber. My brake chamber, it is securely mounted with cotter pin in place. It is not broken, not bent. It has no loose or missing clamps. No loose, damage, or missing hardware. All right. Your slack adjuster and push rod. This is your slack adjuster and push rod. You want to make sure your slack adjuster and push rod is securely mounted with a cotter pin, in place. You have to make sure it is not broke, bent, loose. There's no missing or damaged parts, no missing or damaged hardware. With brakes release, it should not have no more than 1 inch of movement when pulled by hand. You want to check your brake linings, which is behind your tires, which is behind the rim of your tires. Your brake linings, they're not worn dangerously thin. They're not contaminated with grease or oil. You want to check your brake drums. You want to make sure that your brake drums are not cracked. There's no dents. There's no holes. They're not contaminated with grease or oil. Then you're going to move on to your front wheel. Your front wheel, ICD, inflation condition depth. You must say ICD, which stands for inflation condition depth. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure that your tires, your front steer tire, is properly inflated. You want to make sure your steer tire is properly inflated and checked with the tire gauge. Next thing you want to check is your valve stem and cap. You want to make sure that your valve stem and cap is not broken, loose, damaged, missing, or leaking. Okay? The next thing you want to check is the condition of your tires. You want to make sure the condition of your tires are worn evenly, no cuts, no chunks, no gouges to your tire tread and sidewall. Your tire depth, your steer tire depth. Make sure that your steer tire depth has no less than 4/32 tread depth on steer tires. How's everybody doing? Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you all having a great day. Okay, you want to make sure your tire depth has no less than 4/32 tread depth on steer tires. Your rims, you want to make sure that your rims, are not damaged, they're not bent, they have no wells, no rust, or powder trails indicating loose lug nuts. All right, you want to make sure that your lug nuts, all of your lug nuts are not loose, they're not missing, there's no cracks, there's no distortion in your bolt holes. Your axle seal, okay? This axle seal should have a sight glass, but this one does not have a sight glass. If your axle seal does have a sight glass, you want to make sure that your oil is filled to the proper level and it is securely mounted and it is not leaking. All right? If I missed anything, let me know in the comments. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the in-cab inspection. I'm going to do that a little later because I have to go back over to the other side of the range and do my backing and maneuverings. So I'll get back with you guys very, very shortly.